Every human endeavor has a negative attached to it. Look at book printing. Authors invest creative energy into writing a book, and in return, they get money. Good for them. Readers pay for a book because they know that they'll enjoy it and get value out of it, and if they don't like the price, then they don't pay it. Good for them. The publisher gets to make money off of other people's effort. Good for them. There's already a problem arising of whether or not how much money the author earns versus how much money the publisher earns is fair, but we can even forget about that, and there's still a problem. The environmental impact of book printing. How many tons of paper are used each year to produce books? So while books may provide a net positive to the world, they also provide a negative. Ebooks don't escape this problem. And besides, they come with a different problem. It's basically the second law of thermodynamics. No process can be 100% efficient. Energy is always lost. All human endeavors use up available energy in the universe and convert it into unusable energy. Making one book might have such a small environmental impact that it's hard to even notice. Printing 1,000,000 books, on the other hand, now that can be measured in CO2. Deontology is the moral philosophy that says an action should be considered moral or not based on the action itself. A certain set of rules for deontological thinking is inevitably necessary. You must decide which actions are the bad ones. If that makes you wonder what criteria there could be to judge something by other than the moral valence of the action itself, consider the focus of different moral philosophies. Ones that put primary importance on the intent of the action. Forget good or bad actions. Did you intend to do good? Or ones that put importance on the consequences of the action. Did doing that thing make something good happen? Deontology, at least on the surface, is not really concerned with these other modes of thinking. Typically, it's, what do the rules say? Deontology is most often associated with the 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant. But he didn't coin the term, and the ideas of deontology far predate him. His theory of ethics involves acting from a sense of duty, and doing things that are good in and of themselves, and under all circumstances. However, in Kant's ethics, motives for the action are also taken into consideration. So, that example I used before of book printing is one place where deontology runs into problems. It doesn't account for scale. It doesn't take into consideration the question, how much of a good thing is too much? When does a good thing become bad? Can a good thing even become bad? Utilitarianism, on the other hand, is all about scale. The primary concern with utilitarianism is, how much good are we producing? How much of a bad thing is acceptable to produce a good thing? Deontology answers this question by saying, there is no amount. If a thing is bad, it is unacceptable no matter how many good things come out of it. With such a black and white system, you're left in kind of an awkward position in the book printing scenario. Is education bad? Is reading bad? Is printing books bad? Is earning money bad? Is cutting down trees bad? Is emitting CO2 bad? Is contributing to climate change bad? If any one of those things is bad, then from a deontological perspective, you can't morally print books, unless you can get around all those things somehow. See, it's not concerned with how much, it's concerned with what. If you say, in the deontological sense, that those things are not bad, then they're not bad no matter the scale. Generally, in ethics, it's totally logical to put an asterisk on things. To say, it's bad when it gets to this point. But that's no longer deontology. That's situationism, or utilitarianism, or something else. If a deontologist thinks the environmental impact of printing one book is acceptable, then they must think it's acceptable for 2 books, or 2 billion. You can say it's wrong to kill people, and I can agree with you, 99.9% of the time. But what about when that person is trying to kill you, and you can't see any other way to survive the situation except by killing them? What about when that person is a genocidal dictator who otherwise can't be stopped? What about when that person is seconds away from killing an innocent person on purpose? Is it not better to kill a bad person than to let a good person die? If you're a deontologist, and you concede that killing is okay under circumstances like these, then to be logically consistent, you either have to stop being a deontologist, or you need to start thinking that killing is okay under all circumstances. In The Dark Knight, the Joker uses utilitarian dilemmas to expose Batman's deontological flaws. I've said in a previous video that deontology is typically the domain of movie heroes, and utilitarianism is typically the domain of movie villains. Heroes often have a strict moral code. Batman and Superman both have a code to never kill people. But usually those plot lines involve them needing to go beyond their code. Superman has to kill someone because the alternative is letting more people die. Utilitarianism is usually the domain of movie villains. But good villains, compelling villains, ones that aren't just evil for evil's sake, have a just cause. They're right. The evil comes in with their method. The villain of Kingsman has a completely cogent argument.
When you get a virus, you get a fever. That's the human body raising its core temperature to kill the virus. Planet Earth works the same way. Global warming is the fever. Mankind is the virus. We're making our planet sick. A cull is our only hope. If we don't reduce our population ourselves, there's only one of two ways this can go. The host kills the virus, or the virus kills the host. Either way,
the result is the same. The virus dies.
So we need to reduce our numbers and control ourselves. That's all wonderful. What's evil is taking over other people's bodies to get them to kill each other, all while safeguarding the rich. A non-evil way to work towards the same goal would be to use your billionaire funds to start a voluntary sterilization program and spread awareness about the problem. Perhaps you could fund renewable energy and sustainable agriculture as well. Evil, in these movies, is usually in taking shortcuts and neglecting the desires of other people. It's not in any specific action. The point is, ethics is about more than just actions and intentions. It's also about consequence. Another glaring issue with deontology is that it doesn't take specific situations into account. Can you really say that there is an action that is bad, regardless of the circumstances? Is there any action that is intrinsically evil? Lying? Stealing? Killing? If you're hiding Jews from the Nazis, and the Nazis ask, "Hey, are you hiding Jews?" and you say, "No," is that bad? Is it evil to lie to them? If someone steals something, and you steal it back to give it back to the original owner, is that evil? If you kill someone who's trying to kill you, is that evil? If you're starving and you kill and eat an animal, is that evil? Consider, if you're not literally starving and you kill a human in order to eat them, that's very evil. But when you replace that human with nearly any animal, somehow it isn't evil anymore? Does this make sense? The point is, there's always a situation where a seemingly evil act can become noble, or at least justifiable. So is there such a thing as an intrinsically evil act? I can accept that certain actions are generally evil in most circumstances, but there's always an exception, and deontology doesn't account for exceptions. And what about when your rules come into contradiction with each other?
You have forsaken every vow you ever took.
So many vows. They make you swear and swear. Defend the king, obey the king. Obey your father. Protect the innocent, defend the weak. And what if your father despises the king? What if the king massacres the innocent? It's too much. No matter what you do, you're forsaking one vow or another.
Can we make a comprehensive deontological rule? You could say, do not do things to others that they do not want done to them. But what about actions that actually benefit people even though they resist it? Like taking your child to the dentist. So how about that rule is, do not do things to others that they do not want done to them, both in that moment and afterward. If you ask that same child when they're an adult if they're glad that you took them to the dentist when they were a child, they'll probably say yes. They have to both not want it in the moment and afterward for it to be bad. Why? Well, firstly, for the case I just described of not wanting it in the moment but being glad of it later, but also because the reverse needs to be accounted for. Simple regret shouldn't make for an unethical decision. But what about when someone wants something, but it actually harms them? Should feeding into other people's self-destructive habits be immoral? Probably. It's probably not good to give heroin to a heroin addict, unless they're in a controlled rehabilitation setting where they have to wean off it slowly in order to avoid the detrimental withdrawal symptoms. So now the rule is, do not do things to others that they do not want done to them, both in the moment and afterward, or that are detrimental to them despite them wanting it. Already it's getting complicated and quickly slipping away from deontology into situationism. And there's still a problem. This rule doesn't call for any action. It's not prescriptive, it's proscriptive. It just calls for certain actions not to happen. It's a live and let live policy, which is great, but it's only about not doing bad actions. So should it be do things to others that they do want done to them, and do not do things to others that they do not want done to them, both in the present moment and afterward, or that are detrimental to them despite them wanting it. I'm sure this rule still has some holes. The point is, though, the more nuanced and complicated your moral code is, the less deontological it is, and the more situational it is. Following a rule of not hitting people is great the vast majority of the time, except for when you need to hit people. Changing that rule to something like, don't hit people unnecessarily, leaves a lot of room open for interpretation. But also is something that deontology isn't really equipped to make sense of. I'm not saying deontology is bad. I'm saying deontology is not enough. It is not sufficient to make up 100% of your morality. Perhaps not even 80%, or maybe even 50%. But it should make up at least some. When you've got a rule that says killing people is generally bad, there is much more blocking you from killing people. If you've got a rule that says killing people is always bad, then you'll be the one standing by as people around you are getting killed. The thing is, there are hardly any pure utilitarians, but there are pure deontologists. Most modern utilitarians include deontological rules of thumb called side constraints. Certain things that you shouldn't do, even if they result in an outsized good outcome, such as killing one person to increase the happiness of many people. In the book Anarchy, State, and Utopia, moral philosopher Robert Nozick suggests that these side constraints should only be violated when that violation prevents an even greater violation. So, while there are hardly any pure utilitarians, there seems to be many pure deontologists. Or at least people who would like to think of themselves as purely deontological. Why is this, you might ask? Because deontology is the moral philosophy of choice for religion. Deontology is about following a set of rules. Rules that must not be violated. And who's the ultimate rule giver? God. Or, more accurately, religious people themselves, because they invented God. Religious deontology differs from a Kantian perspective of ethics. Where Kant argued that moral duty is derived from human rationality, religious moral duty fits in the category of divine command theory. An action is good if God decreed it to be good. A non-religious person has nothing binding them to any one moral archetype, such as deontology or consequentialism, so they are more likely to see any flaws contained there and have diversity within their ethics. That's not to say that their ethics can't be flawed, they most likely still are flawed. Whereas a religious person can't ditch their deontology because they think it's God's deontology. As much as the people I'm describing want to be pure deontologists, there is really no such thing as pure deontology anyway. Deontology has consequentialism baked right into it, whether a deontologist realizes that or not. The reason an action is originally thought of to be bad is because it produces bad results, or at least the perception that it produces bad results. As I just mentioned, deontology often comes from religion. Religion makes claims that certain actions are bad by design, but it is impossible to separate an action from its consequence. And when it gets down to it, why do religious people avoid doing these bad actions? Because bad actions are punished in the next life. Ordinarily, consequentialism is concerned with the consequences in this life, but religious deontology is really just consequentialism that's concerned with the consequences in the next life. But the same type of thing goes for non-religious deontology. If one asserts that an action is bad, it's because they do not believe that that action can ever produce good results, or at least can't produce net good results. The ends justify the means is a truly anti-deontological idiom. The deontological version would be the ends never justify the means. That's usually taken to mean that even if the result of the action is good, committing an action that's against our code should never be done. But what's going on here is actually something different. A deontologist is unavoidably concerned with the consequences, but what they do is divide the consequences into two categories: short-term or immediate results and long-term results. The long-term results are what they're more concerned with, and what, for some reason, they don't think of as being consequentialist. It's less that we cannot kill people because killing people is wrong, and more that we cannot kill people because killing people establishes a dangerous precedent for the future. This was one of Immanuel Kant's primary worries. In his view, a lie is always bad, even if some good result occurs because of it. If that lie doesn't harm any particular human being, then it harms humanity as a whole by distorting and eroding the truth. And if we make exceptions, then the principles lose their power and are no longer principles. When a deontologist says the ends never justify the means, they mean to say something like, a world where killing people can be acceptable is worse than a world where it can't be, even if that first world does save some lives now and again. So it's still about the consequences. Just the short term.
Here I made a mistake. I meant to say long term, not short term.
Hard to foresee consequences, like what kind of action does this world create? Or if not those concerns, or perhaps in addition to them, many deontological views often take the form of a bad action is bad for the self. By harming others, you're harming yourself. Like in Harry Potter, the act of killing someone breaks your soul into pieces, damaging your humanity. Apparently, deontology is a fundamental truth of the Harry Potter universe. So does Mrs. Weasley now have a broken soul for killing Bellatrix Lestrange? But no matter how you slice it, concerns about the harm an action will cause, the consequences, are implicit in deontology. Therefore, deontology is truly just a type of consequentialism trying to be something else. One of the most alarming aspects of deontology is that, generally speaking, the reason certain actions are to be avoided is more often because of the punishment for doing it, rather than the suffering it'll cause in others. This isn't true for Kantian ethics, at least not explicitly. Rather than being based in empathy, it's based in authoritarian commandments. Imagine two school children in the same situation. In both situations, a child hits its classmate, the other classmate cries, and the teacher reprimands him. The consequentialist child hits his classmate in the face and learns that it's a bad thing to do from the tears and the distress he witnesses in his classmate. The deontologist child hits his classmate in the face and learns that it's a bad thing to do from the teacher who reprimands him for it. In both cases, the teacher reprimands the child, and the child who is hit cries. But child A and child B take their lessons from a different source. So I ask, which source is more stable? Which source is more healthy? Which source is more moral? I would argue that source B has almost nothing to do with morality. It's just learning to obey. Both sources may change the child's behavior, but which source changes his heart? Personally, I kind of hate to use the word heart when referring to feelings or whatever, because it's just based on the mind, but you know what I mean. The kid who fears his teacher only refrains from doing bad things in order to prevent a personal suffering, whereas the other kid refrains from doing bad things in order to prevent the suffering of others. One final issue with deontology that I'll address, because there are more, is that because deontology doesn't account for scale, because it doesn't account for specific situations or exceptions to the rule, and because deontologists believe their laws to be superordinate, whether these laws come from God or from the human will, they are generally greater than us, not to be changed. Deontology is not well suited to adapt over time. Moral laws that were established hundreds of years ago are expected to hold up just as well today as they did then. And honestly, I don't even think they held up very well then. Deontological laws do change, but very slowly. It's a bit awkward to have to amend something that was supposed to be a universal moral law. Once again, consider religion as an example. The Bible condemns homosexuality as an abomination, even in the New Testament. So, historically, Christians have been against homosexuality. Recently, there has been a cultural movement of accepting homosexuality, especially within the past 20 years. Massachusetts was the first state to legalize gay marriage in 2003. In 2015, it became legal nationwide. Now you're likely to find churches flying pride flags or otherwise trying to show that they accept gay people. All but the more fundamentalist churches were successfully pressured into changing their rules. But because of the inherent discomfort in changing laws that were supposed to be higher, a lot of revisionist history is going on here. Churches and religious people are now trying to act as if they didn't hate gay people just 10 years ago. This critique of deontology is part of a larger critique of all myopic moral philosophies. In my view, if a moral philosophy only looks at the goodness of an action, or if it only looks at the goodness of the result of an action, or if it only looks at the goodness of the intent of the action, or if it only looks at the goodness of the person who committed the action, rather than all of these things, it is far too narrow and missing out on a great deal of relevant information. By all means, incorporate some deontology into your ethics by using side constraints or generalizations, like killing people is generally bad. But I would advise against letting deontology be your whole morality. You've got to account for scale, situation, exceptions, and moral progress.